of course, want to welcome Antonio and Fred. Antonio and Fred have just arrived from Italy, and they basically forgot how to speak English. So tonight I will be speaking in English, and Antonio will probably respond in Italian, unless he surprises me and he recuperates his voice in English. And Fred will answer in English, but I want to turn immediately to Antonio. Thank you for this film. Thank you for your work. And in fact, my first question for Antonio is, Antonio, before you turned to screenwriting and to directing, you wrote 5 novels, and you actually founded the first or the most influential music magazine dedicated to rap music, Essay Magazine. All of this was not enough. What prompted you to turn to filmmaking, to the visual?
Io ho iniziato come regista perché la mia intenzione era quella di avere il controllo assoluto delle mie opere.
He started to think about directing because he really wanted to have absolute control over his work. We know that.
In Italia è molto difficile scrivere una storia con un cast totalmente nero che racconta un pubblico, cioè una storia che per molti è nuova e sperare che questa cosa rimanga intatta fino alla fine.
Yeah. It's very difficult in Italy, of course, to create a story that is entirely about a black a cast and to actually have control of the story until the end. So were you successful in keeping control of your story?
Assolutamente sì.
Yes. Wow, that's a big story.
Sì, assolutamente sì.
Yes.
E quindi niente, scrivendo questo film mi sono detto giriamolo. E ne ho parlato con Amazon, loro hanno detto va bene e quindi poi è nata questa esperienza.
So the first step was actually to write down the script, and then he spoke to Amazon Studios, and they actually welcomed the idea of giving him a chance to be a director also of his first film. Congratulations. This happens in America every day. Doesn't it? So that's a wonderful story about your shift, but and music, of course, is absolutely central to your film. The film is very basically connected to music, but there is also a lot of literature in your films. Before the film, you also wrote a TV series that Netflix produced called Zero, and in that TV series there are references to literature, James Baldwin specifically, and also in this film we have references to literature, from Dickens to actually Shego and also Salgari.
Sì.
So my question is, why these choices? Why these authors in this film? Is there anything?
Ma James Baldwin è per me forse uno tra i 3 migliori autori di sempre, ma per l'impatto che ha avuto nella mia vita leggendolo, no? In questo film c'è anche James Baldwin, è sul letto, è sulla testa del letto, sempre se la strada potesse parlare.
So he's answering the question. James Baldwin was certainly one of the major influences for him personally, and even in this film I didn't notice it, but the book is there, If Beale Street Could Talk.
Ma quando ho iniziato a scrivere, improvvisamente mi è successa questa cosa che ho voluto recuperare tutte quelle letture che non avevo fatto prima dei 20 anni. Quindi ho avuto 2 o 3 anni in cui passavo tutti i giorni della mia vita a leggere. E ho scoperto tutti questi autori molto tardi, no? E quando io cerco di fare queste cose, come magari lavorare nella musica o anche fare film, cerco sempre di... Questo per me è un modo solo di ringraziare queste persone, no? Coinvolgerle all'interno di questi progetti, musicalmente, no? Oppure anche menzionandoli, è solo un modo per ringraziarli, per dirgli se io sono arrivato fino a qui anche grazie a quello che mi avete lasciato con le vostre opere.
So the books that I was mentioning are part of a path that Antonio, from what I understand, arrived later in life, and so he didn't read them at first, but then he's been reading them, and now it's a kind of a homage to these authors, bringing them in his musical and in his movie making. That's a very interesting. What about Salgari? Salgari is a very interesting author because it belongs to a colonial period in Italian literature. Did you have anything in your specific upbringing that you read Salgari, or was it a reference?
Io da quando ero ragazzino facevo questa cosa che non so se qua c'è, che si chiama il crest. Il grest.
Ingrest?
Il grest.
Grest?
Il grest.
I don't even know what that
Ah, ok,
is.
il grest
So
è...
I need to first find out.
No, è una cosa molto semplice. Un gruppo di ragazzi d'estate, insieme a un'associazione, una chiesa, eccetera, eccetera, stanno insieme e la mattina fanno i compiti e il pomeriggio possono giocare.
Oh, this is actually something that I did not go through but it's a group of friends that actually first studies together and then plays together.
E c'era uno dei maestri che non so perché, ma a me regalò dei libri, tra cui c'erano dei libri di Salgari e c'era anche Il barone rampante di Italo Calvino. E ricordo proprio questo mio approccio con la lettura, io ci provai, perché me li regalò, io pensai, leggiamoli. Iniziai a leggere Il barone rampante, lessi 3 pagine e mollai perché non capii nulla.
So he tried first with Calvino when he was a young boy, and this teacher was giving him books to read, and that was a defeat because he couldn't read more than 3 pages. But then when Salgari came along, you could read it all.
Al tempo no.
Not at that time, so he went back to Salgari later on. Let me ask you something that now relates back or puts together this your series for Netflix and this film. I think there is a thread between the two. In the series Zero, the main character has the ability to become invisible. So there, it's his superpower, is the ability to become invisible, and the story takes off from this. Here, we consistently have the figure of the ghost that comes in your movie Autumn Beat. The ghost writer, the ghost father, and there is something about the ghost and the visibility and invisibility. How do you conceive that as a theme? Is it related to your experience as black person that has grown up in Italy? Is that a connection, or is something that comes from even deeper in your experience?
Ma una cosa che connetteva tantissimo me e i miei amici era la forte mancanza di una persona importante nella nostra vita. Ed era una cosa stranissima perché tutti i miei amici non hanno il papà. Tutti. Cioè io, se penso a tutti i miei amici più importanti, non hanno il papà. Mia madre è tornata in Angola a vivere quando io ero in adolescenza e quindi tutti noi abbiamo avuto sempre un fantasma nella nostra vita, quindi una presenza importante che però poi era un'assenza. E credo che questa cosa torni nella mia scrittura, nel mio racconto, perché magari è stato un trauma che mi ha segnato.
So Antonio was born in Italy from Angolian parents, but he grew up and the father was not there, and then the mother went back to Angola, and he's telling me, this I learned only now, that most of his friends were without a father in their family, so there was always this sense of a ghostly presence or absence that was always there. So it's very related to your
Sì.
personality. But you see this also as something that relates to not just a personal experience, but something about the condition of Africans or black people in Italy.
Ma sai, quando sei nero non lo puoi nascondere. Tu non puoi cioè nel senso è una cosa che non puoi nascondere. Però è una cosa che nessuno sa, sono le sofferenze che un uomo nero passa, no? Cioè quello è che questa sofferenza poi ti porta a volerti nascondere. Io penso a mia sorella, per tutta la sua adolescenza faceva fatica ad uscire di casa, faceva fatica a relazionarsi con le persone. Io stesso, fino a poco prima di vendere tanti libri, io facevo molta fatica. Ricordo che quando stavo in contesti con tante persone iniziavo a sudare. Stavo molto male.
Let me translate this because it's very deeply thought. So there's, of course, if you're a black person in Italy, you can't hide. And that's a truism, but what you always have to hide is your suffering. And so this sense of hiding yourself, your true suffering becomes part of your being visible but hiding. And this is something that Antonio carried, and his sister also was afraid to go out. And himself, in maybe when he started writing, until he started writing, and until he had his first success writing, he was actually very non-forthcoming in going out. So would you say that writing was something that helped you to overcome your sense of isolation and invisibility?
No, non è stata la scrittura, è stato il successo che ho ottenuto con la scrittura. Perché quella cosa prima di tutto mi ha fatto capire che ero in grado di fare qualcosa. Io che per tutta la vita mi sono sempre chiesto, ma io che cosa posso fare? Sono arrivato a 18 anni, i miei amici già lavoravano, io non lavoravo, mi piaceva il calcio. E quindi mi ha fatto capire che ero in grado di fare qualcosa. E poi mi ha insegnato una cosa fondamentale, che sbagliare non è sbagliato e che nella vita devi rischiare, cioè devi provarci. Io ricordo, non dimenticherò mai, è un momento della mia vita che non dimenticherò mai. Avevo già scritto il libro.
Let me translate up to here. So Antonio is actually telling me that it was not writing in itself, but actually the success that came with writing that made him comfortable to now be visible. Up to that moment, he had only thought about soccer and maybe, but always trying to do something that would make him comfortable to become visible.
Io ricordo un giorno della mia vita, non dimenticherò mai, era un venerdì. Io avevo già scritto il libro e avevo già stampato, io il mio primo libro l'ho autopubblicato all'inizio e poi Mondadori l'ha comprato. Avevo già comprato le copie, mi avevano fatto dare un prestito di 400 euro da un mio amico. Avevo già mandato il libro per farlo autopubblicare, ero in macchina e a un certo punto pensai, ma io non ho mai pensato, e se non vendo neanche una copia? Non ci avevo mai pensato, cioè fino a quel momento non ho mai pensato, ma se dovesse andare tutto male? E questa cosa mi è servita tantissimo perché spesso le persone fanno io ti faccio questo esempio, un animale, un uccello, quando fa freddo, parte e va in un posto caldo, va. Gli esseri umani si fanno 1000 domande, chiedono all'amico, ma per te dovrei farlo, si guardano attorno, cercano il feedback è del genitore. Se gli animali facessero così girerebbero attorno, no?
I need to translate this because it's very complex. But what he's basically, Antonio is saying is that he learned very much that you need to risk. And he learned this the moment in which he self-published his first book. And he was there putting money in self-publishing, and then all of a sudden he was thinking, what if I don't sell a single copy? And then he just took that thought out of his mind and is saying, you know, you need to just fly and just go. Just like birds just go. They don't ask themselves whether they're going to get on the other side from that voyage.
Poi l'ho fatto sempre nella vita. Cioè io ho 30 anni, ho fatto tantissime cose e il gioco è sempre lo stesso. Penso ad una cosa, la dico ad alta voce, ridono di quella cosa o mi dicono che sono pazzo, la faccio
E poi ti dicono è successo.
e poi
So the trick is actually to think something and say it loud and then make it happen. That's his trick. He's 30 years old. He's written 5 books. He is one of the greatest bloggers, and he has a show on the radio. He's done a series with Netflix, a movie with Amazon, and he still just comes up with great ideas consistently.
l'unica cosa che consiglio vivamente è che io personalmente ho in un momento della mia vita un po' perso la strada, l'unica cosa che conta davvero è fare qualcosa che ti piace. Ne parlavamo anche prima, no? Non è importante con chi la fai, l'unica cosa che conta è fare qualcosa che ti piace, perché quello è il tuo passaporto, quello è il tuo biglietto da visita, quello è il tuo manager. Cioè fare qualcosa che ti piace, perché poi devi andare in giro, devi difenderlo, no? Sì, io sono nato a Bustarsizio Varese, sono cresciuto a Ravenna e abito a Milano, oggi sono a Santa Barbara a parlare di un film che ho fatto. È molto importante fare quello che ti piace, perché poi lo devi difendere e tra 10-15 anni ne dovrai parlare. Quindi l'unica cosa che conta è non avere paura e allo stesso tempo fare qualcosa che ti piace.
Well, he's advocating do what you like, because you will call upon to like it again. And 10-15 years from now, you'll have to defend your work and you need to know that you liked it. And I think we all agree with that. Let me ask you one very important question about the influences. I think when I looked at your film at first and I saw the 3 chapters, and I especially saw the cinematography, I immediately thought about Barry Jenkins.
Assolutamente.
And Moonlight as being something of an inspiration for the 3 chapters, but also for the shooting of the main character, the main Ify, the main female character, whose skin reverberates of that not blue but greenish light that comes, and that actually in Moonlight is that a deliberate connection with Jenkins? And if that's so, are your inspirations maybe coming from the American independent filmmakers rather than the Italian tradition?
No, no, l'ispirazione non sono i registi americani, ma tutta la filmografia asiatica.
Oh.
0, l'ispirazione arriva da Ferro 3 di Kim Ki-duk. Questo film è ispirato totalmente da tutta la filmografia di Wong Kar-wai.
Yeah.
La casa nel secondo atto è ispirata al primo film di Wong Kar-wai che si chiama A Day's Been Wild. Tutta la regia è ispirata a 2046 di Wong Kar-wai, che lui fa questa cosa che si nasconde.
Sì.
E lui in tutto il film, in 2046, ci sono solo 3 colori. Che sono, se non sbaglio, il rosso, il verde e il nero, se non sbaglio. E in questo film faccio uguale. L'arancione, il verde utilizzo e il viola a volte.
I'm very impressed because my question had to do with the inspiration from Jenkins, Barry Jenkins, and Oscar-winning Moonlight, but I'm discovering that actually for Antonio the major influences are from East Asian directors and Wong Kar-wai. It's the major point of reference also for this film and for the cinematography. And this is certainly a very interesting connection. So your passion for film was something that predated the involvement in filmmaking. There was a passionate viewer in you.
Sì, io Guardo praticamente solo film asiatici da quando sono molto giovane e amo tutta la filmografia asiatica. I miei registi preferiti sono Wong Kar-wai e Lee Chang-dong e consiglio a tutti di vedere i film di Lee Chang-dong. E no, in questo film, poi ti dico, Moonlight è per me uno dei migliori film usciti negli ultimi 20 anni perché, lo dicevo anche ieri, Moonlight fa una cosa che è fondamentale. Non darti fastidio in qualcosa che ti potrebbe dare fastidio. Cioè,
Close-up.
nella comunità nera c'è un grande tabù nei confronti dell'omosessualità. Io questo film, quando l'ho visto, l'ho fatto vedere a tutti i miei amici. E poi gli ho chiesto cosa ne hai pensato. E nessuno di loro mi ha parlato dell'omosessualità. Nessuno. Nessuno.
So this
E questa cosa è rivoluzionaria.
He's saying that the inspiration from Jenkins' film Moonlight has to do with the ability to make something extremely uncomfortable like homosexuality in the black community registered as no longer uncomfortable. Being able to actually have a film about which people can only talk about the film and not about what the film is about because they've absorbed it. And that's something that he admired in that sense. And it's certainly, and could we say that was an inspiration for you, the ability to speak about something like, parents that fail in some sense? Because in this film, in Autumn Beat, you have characters that are fathering, in certain circumstances, mothers that fail to be mothers. And so there are very difficult themes for the black community, very constant themes. Were you thinking about talking about uncomfortable things, but merging them with music and in that sense making them available?
Guarda, prima di rispondere ti dico una cosa in relazione a quella di prima. Una delle grandi cose che amo da quando è uscito il film è il fatto che molte delle persone che l'hanno visto non mi hanno parlato del fatto che gli attori fossero neri. E questa cosa per me è molto importante perché è la normalità, no? Le persone che lo vedono devono pensare, ok, è normale. Ma sai, sul discorso del fallimento, ma io crescendo ho notato una cosa, ho capito una cosa, anche ascoltando un po' le conversazioni di mio padre e di mia madre. Allora, ai miei genitori nessuno ha insegnato come fare i genitori. Almeno nella cultura dei miei genitori non c'è questa cosa del dialogo tra i figli e i padri. Non c'è. C'è uno schiaffo e vai dritto, basta. E credo che molti genitori falliscano per questo, perché non gli viene insegnato come trattare determinate cose, no? Eccetera, eccetera. Credo che molti di questi genitori falliscano proprio in questo, nel dialogo.
So Antonio is actually saying that there is certainly a connection, and the connection with the role of parents is actually also very personal for him, because he saw that in his culture, parents were never taught how to be parents, and that this was something that actually was very frequent around him, and he grew up with that sense. But he also said that one of the things that he really wanted to achieve with the film was that nobody would see this film as just a all-black cast. We introduce it that way, but that coming out of the films, they were just enamored of the characters without seeing the racial component of it.
C'è una cosa, io non so se tu lo sai, ma credo che loro lo sappiano, io l'ho scoperto quest'anno. Il film Hakim of Zamunda è un film di Eddie Murphy. È un film dove tutto il cast è nero, tutte le persone del film sono nere, tranne un ragazzo che fa il cassiere nel McDonald's. Io l'avrò visto 10 volte quel film e non me ne sono mai accorto. Cioè, non so tu, ma tutto il cast, tutto, non gli attori principali, tutte le persone del film sono nere, tutte. Okay. Tranne una persona che vende un panino da McDonald's. È assurdo.
Okay. So he's actually referring to a film by Eddie Murphy, which I haven't seen, but I think I know which one you mean, and it has all cast that is black, but he didn't see them as black at all. So that was also a successful example. Let me ask you a last question, and then I want to bring Fred into the conversation here. There is also, of course, this very interesting, jarring relationship between the narrating voice, which is the same voice of the character of Tito, but the narrating voice does not stutter. Tito, instead, we know that it stutters. And the narrating voice actually also at times sings at some point. The song that we hear on the basketball court is the voice of Tito. So how did you make these decisions of having a narrating voice that doesn't stutter and then the stuttering Tito?
Non lo so, nel senso che questa cosa allora, non è una balbuzia questa. È proprio una conseguenza dell'incidente che lui fa.
Sì.
E ho pensato, vorrei tantissimo che la voce narrante fosse la voce che ha lui nella sua testa. Cioè, è la voce che ha lui nella sua testa. E quindi è anche un modo per dire, anche per riuscire a cercare di spiegare il talento che avrebbe avuto questo ragazzo, no? E tutto quello che il fratello gli ha tolto. Quindi forse è semplicemente un modo per sottolineare questa cosa.
So it's actually the reason that Tito speaks as a narrator in his own voice without stuttering. It is because it's the voice inside his head. It's the voice that he's always heard. It's the voice that he always wanted to express, that was not robbed by the accident, but actually robbed by the brother. So it's a more genuine voice, and the stuttering voice is the voice of trauma. Thank you, Antonio. Let me bring Fred into the conversation for a second. Fred is himself a filmmaker. He's an educator, but he's also a tremendously powerful organizer of what now has become a whole cultural movement called Black Italia. And certainly Antonio is part of that, but I want to ask Fred if you can give us a sense of what is the Renaissance, this sort of Black Renaissance in Italy, what it is connected to, and what it's creating. If it has a strength, or where does it need to grow, how it's growing.
Yeah, there is, I think, a great challenge in the Italian society, but also a great contribution of a lot of people in the last maybe 10 years. And the revolution of social media, and this has happened also in the United States, where underrepresented groups have more exposure right now, gave a sort of self-platform to be noticed, to tell story. And actually, I'm following Antonio since a lot of years, and when he was self-publishing his book, he was also trying to promote the book with a great video book trailer. And of course, video book trailer can't have the same budget of a film. But the visual storytelling to try also to bring issues, topic, and lives of people were really relevant and sometimes very, very touch. And Antonio worked also in a lot of situations of music. And of course, to promote music, you have to do music video. And I think that some years ago, I see for the first time inside also the Black community, a music video in which basically were represented families, kids. So things that we didn't see in the commercial television or in the mainstream. Of course, the difficulty is like was in the United States many years ago, to have the green light from maybe some company production or some people inside the mainstream, especially in the audiovisual industry. And then in Italy came the other revolution, like United States, because of course in United States and also in Italy, I think are very similar for the inclusivity that streaming platforms are giving inside the society, and the inclusivity that unfortunately is still very difficult to have from a part of the mainstream media. And as a matter of fact that I think that both of your work were Zero and Autumn Beat were produced by huge streaming platform. So I'm waiting, and I'm sure that this is a great time because the stories are out there, and it's a great time also to see this story inside the mainstream. Of course, when we talk the mainstream, we talk about a situation in which the budget is more high, so it's more difficult to have an access to a relevant budget to do a film. That is the reason why, for example, also I'm following a lot of other artists who are engaging sometimes in low budget production or sometimes in documentary films, because of course documentary can be afforded with a small budget and sometimes without waiting a long process of finding or having a green light. And hopefully this is happening inside a huge generation and also inside a different kind of social group inside the society. So not only Afro-Italians, but also women. There are a lot more women filmmakers right now in Italy, and there are a lot of opportunity for them given by the same streaming platform or by the social media. And 3 years ago, for example, there was another movie made by a Bengali guy. His name is Fahim. He made this movie called Bangla. Many years ago, there was a low-budget movie made by Adel Rashid, that is Iraqi-Italian, and the name was Sto per piovere. So I'm sure that many things are growing in Italy, and for a while Italy was a little behind a similar country like Spain, for example. Spain and Italy for me are very similar in terms of the way how they produce projects. So I remember that there were more Afro-Italians directors in Spain 5 years ago. But I think that this is a great momentum, and it's a great momentum also because there are a lot of stories to tell, not only of the present but also story of the past, and so this is it's a very terrific moment, and this production for me it's like Antonio said, a production that you can watch in different ways, and you can also watch the art of the story. This is a story that, of course, the cast could be white or whatever. It's not the story is very powerful.
So let us find out what new projects, Antonio, are you involved in, and maybe also you, Fred. What is next for you?
Sto facendo tante cose, perché io ho questa cosa che...
Playing soccer?
No.
No, okay, no. He's not gonna become a champion of soccer yet.
No, sto facendo tante cose perché non riesco a stare fermo. Mm-hmm. E sto lavorando ad un talent show con Amazon, che è un po' strano perché è un talent che ha come obiettivo quello di andare a rispondere a delle esigenze di mercato. In Italia non abbiamo rapper donna. La prima stagione sarà sul rapper donna, poi magari in futuro magari su rapper neri o eccetera eccetera. E poi sto lavorando a una serie, ad un soggetto di serie, a un film, e però sono tutte idee, quindi non so se le produrranno.
He's working on a talent show that will be looking for women rappers in Italy. And that will be the first incarnation, and then it might be obviously going into different types of rappers, maybe black rappers again. And then he's also working at a new series and a new movie. I think we look forward to seeing all of them. What about you, Fred?
I started to shoot some part of a project that is connected to telling the story of Africans during the Renaissance Europe through the art history. So basically I visited a lot of museums, interviewing a lot of scholars, and I want to trace this story and how African came from 1442 to Lisbon in Portugal, and then they spread around Europe. And of course, I want also to highlight something that I knew, but sometimes we don't take for granted. The fact that maybe the 50% of them were not servants or slaves, were travelers, diplomats, sons of kings, artists. This is because I never see myself represented not only in the contemporary society but also in the history. And it's funny when you visit a museum with a different watch and you start to watch really carefully the paintings and you see this black presence in thousands and thousands of monuments. So it's also to give a sort of click to our brain to see, hey, look, we were there. As a matter of fact, that the title is We Were There.
I want to just close by saying something that I think is very evident from the way both you and Antonio have talked. It seems to me that what we consider to be this transnational potential in Italian culture is really very well represented by the work that you are doing. You're connecting with not only a black diaspora and a transnational black culture, which brings in the East, now we discover, but also African American authors of great importance, like James Baldwin, like Jenkins, and many others. And you are making visible the history of blackness in Italy. And you've done it with other documentaries, and now you're doing it also historically. Now, that seems to me to really bring a very important transnational form of linking Italianness to other forms of viewing. And I really thank you for your work.
Well,
Grazie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.